This episode of Bullet Heaven was made using Pack-a-Punch SCART cables from Retro Gaming Cables, and using the OSSC from Video Game Perfection. I've gone on record many times before saying that Air Zonk is my favorite game of all time, and nothing has changed even after all of these years. But when I was young and rash and emulated like a filthy wannabe pirate, I came across a game that resembled Air Zonk so much from its visuals to its sound that I just couldn't help but be intrigued. It was a game that many called a spiritual predecessor to my favorite game, with elements so similar it might as well have been. And that game is Coryoon, Child of Dragon. Coryoon, Child of Dragon is a horizontal scrolling shoot-'em-up developed by Naxatsoft and published in 1991 exclusively for the PC Engine in Japan. No other versions or releases of this game were ever made available outside of illegal ROMs, so it's no surprise that this is now an issue that can't really be ignored if you like your games legitimate. It allegedly has quite the reputation, and I do love me a legendary PC Engine shooter, but with so many comparisons to Air Zonk and a very clear connection with a lot of the people behind both titles, how does it really hold up? Let's take a closer look. Coryoon is actually a very simple shooting game that was very obviously made with a particular subset of players in mind. Typical 8-way digital movement will get the player's titular dragon around the screen with the option to increase his speed by pressing the select button. Doing so will visibly increase the size of his wings, which is a nice touch. Coryoon comes standard equipped with a rapid fireball attack that deals enough damage to get by on a basic level. Shot with the 2-button, players don't even really need to engage the turbo function on the PC Engine pad for a satisfactory rate of fire, though it can still be slightly helpful to do so. Not firing at all will charge a powerful attack that fills Coryoon's cheeks. When they have been filled to capacity, a giant fireball can be launched with the 2-button to inflict major damage to anything it hits. It'll pass right through most enemies it comes in contact with, allowing players to hit entire rows of enemies with just one shot. This can be a little risky in later stages thanks to high numbers of enemies and shots, but very helpful during boss encounters. Along the way, the player will encounter a number of storks that will drop power-up items for players to collect when they are shot. These orbs grant a powerful elemental attack to Coryoon depending on its color. Red orbs will allow Coryoon to fire a steady stream of fire. Blue will change Coryoon's attack to a stream of cutter-style water shots, and yellow allows players to fire a spread-style barrage of small lightning bolts in up to 8 directions. Collecting multiple power-ups of the same type will increase the power of the player's elemental shots by 1 level to a maximum of 3. If the player gets hit though, they will lose their elemental attack and revert to basic fireball shots indicated with an auditory cue. If Coryoon is hit again when green, a life will be lost. Granted, storks will appear regularly in every stage, so another power-up is rarely far off, even when fighting bosses. There are also 4 additional sub-weapon items that can be collected to assist the player as well. A heart will summon a pair of defensive fairies which can both block bullets and fire their own. They can be locked in place above and below Coryoon with the 1-button. A club will allow all fruit to be drawn in towards Coryoon whenever the 1-button is held. This is super helpful for score. A diamond will reduce Coryoon's size. As was also the case in Air Zonk, when reduced, Coryoon cannot perform a charged attack. Finally, a spade can be deployed with the 1-button to perform a screen-clearing bomber attack. Enemies defeated in this manner will release large fruit as a result. These sub-weapons can be found through enemy destruction, and each is very useful, but only one can be held at a time. Subsequent sub-weapon pickups will replace the last one that the player has held. Chickens can also be of great help. When shot, they'll release one of 3 useful options that can assist Coryoon in his quest. The option that results will be randomly selected, and depending on its color will behave in different ways. A blue option will seek out and ram into enemies, a red option will supplement Coryoon's firepower with its own, and a yellow option will fly ahead of Coryoon to absorb bullets while firing lightning in 4 diagonal directions. All of this comes together to give first-time players a decent chance at getting through the game. But that's not saying terribly much, as extends happen all the damn time in Coryoon by way of the player's score. In less than a minute, players should see their first extend, and it doesn't take very long at all to obtain the maximum stock of 9 lives. Even if players end up losing a few, this ends up happening pretty much throughout the entire game too, sometimes with multiple extends occurring at once, allowing most players to see the end of the game without much effort at all. Coryoon plays over the course of 8 stages, each with a somewhat long length, with multiple phases, a sub-boss, and capped off with a multi-phase boss encounter. The exception, of course, being the boss rush in Stage 8. A playthrough can take a decent amount of time to complete by shooting game standards, clocking it at over 40 minutes excluding the end sequence. On its default difficulty, Coryoon is a walk in the park, with the exception maybe of the final boss, but even then, it won't take very long at all to figure out its patterns, and formulate strategies for one of the easiest 1cc's in shooting games. Coryoon is clearly aimed at very young players, and to that end, we have to say it, this truly is baby's first shmup. While it is still true that there will be a lot of stuff flooding the screen in some stages, from enemies to shots, and players may find themselves dying as a result, the gratuitous extends will keep them afloat so long as they keep shooting and collecting fruit for score. Even moderately experienced players are going to want to ratchet up the difficulty to hard to see any real challenge, and even then, it's still more than manageable. Coryoon is a charming game though, and unsurprisingly, as a shooting game from Naxatsoft, it controls superbly. While it is honestly stupid dumb easy, it's still a good time in the end, allowing, at the very least, for players to sit back and relax with it for reasons that we'll get into shortly. But there's more. Like later games from Naxatsoft that would be featured in their Hudson Caravan-style summer carnival competitions, Coryoon also features a pair of time attack modes. Both 2-minute and 5-minute modes exist for competition-style play, though the game will need to be soft reset to the title screen by pressing select and run when time is up. Just like, let us press start or the 1 button or whatever to get back to the title screen, come on. But that's not the only real fault we found from a gameplay standpoint. We did notice that some enemy shots had a tendency to get hidden against some backdrops. The graphics engine sometimes gets a little overloaded too, resulting in some elements being occluded. This often leads to more than a couple cheap deaths from things we literally couldn't see until other bits were destroyed and removed from the playfield, especially in Stage 7. Other than those issues though, Coryoon is a pretty good time. Coryoon can also be started from any cleared stage, which can be accessed from the stage option on the title screen. Because Coryoon features backup memory support, players with a CD unit, Tendokoi 2, a Duo unit, or the Super SD System 3 can maintain their progress and access these stages even after powering off the game. Excellent touch. Coryoon also features a dead simple scoring system. Basically, the bulk of it all boils down to enemy destruction and fruit collection. Just blast away as many foes as possible to release fruit and the extends will flow like water. But there are a few ways to grab some pretty decent pointage, starting with large fruit. These giant versions of the smaller fruit bonuses will always award thousands of points each, with some topping 10,000 points at a time. Getting large fruit will usually occur with specific enemy types, but also when a blue spade is used to clear out the screen. When used in a crowded spot, a huge amount of big fruit can often result. Collecting it is another matter, so players should anticipate their arc so as to maximize their totals. Of course, obtaining a green club will help greatly in achieving big fruit bonuses consistently throughout the game, especially with rapid large fruit drops. This aside though, a few other typical bonuses can also be obtained. Killing chains of enemies with a well-placed fireball will award a progressively higher score for each subsequent enemy defeated in just one shot, rather than releasing fruit. 1,000 points will also be awarded for every power-up and sub-weapon collected, with a 5,000 point bonus for power-ups of the same type at maximum power. The player's top score will be displayed on the title screen at startup, and Coryoon's backup memory system even allows the player's score to be maintained regardless of if the power is turned off. Better still, using a Tendokoi bank card for those with a CD unit, Tendokoi 2 or Duo, or a Super SD system of course, lets players save their data to flash memory, allowing them to last more or less forever. However, scores for the 2-minute and 5-minute time attack modes will unfortunately not be saved. With all of this in mind though, given the extremely generous extend score, it's not especially critical to juice the game for every point possible, unless of course one might be competing for score. Coryoon's presentation is where the biggest comparisons to Airzonk occur, and at a glance it's easy to see why. With main programmer Yoshiharu Takaoka and many others behind both Coryoon and the later PC Denjin and Airzonk involved in development, there's a ton of overlap here. This resulted in the two sharing near-identical graphics and sound engines. In fact, it appears that Naxat actually ghost-developed Airzonk right alongside Red Company. Sporting a similar amount of parallax scroll, bright colors, a ton of cuteness overload, and a signature sound, it's clear that Coryoon is cut from a very similar cloth to my favorite game of all time. It's hard to deny that Coryoon has a great visual appeal. Just look at this little guy. Some enemies may be small, but for the most part, everything from Coryoon to the enemies to the bosses to the backgrounds is designed with just a ton of personality. While not on the same level as Airzonk would be, they still have the right feel for the kind of game that Coryoon is. But there's also a hard-coded glitch in the graphics renderer as well, which will result in these odd staticky bits in many parts of the game, especially in Stage 5. We thought we may have had a damaged game card, but this would happen in RGB over a FrameMeister and OSSC, and even through composite on both LCD and CRT sets. There's nothing that can be done about this, unfortunately, though it's rumored that some ROMs have a fix implemented to them. Still, you know you've got a legitimate copy of the game if this error is present. It's not especially serious, and it doesn't affect the gameplay too much, but it is a bit of an eyesore. The sound is also super strong in Coryoon. Composer and sound designers Daisuke Morishima and Hisashi Matsushita have crafted an unmistakable sound set that was used extensively in both Coryoon and Airzonk, as well as other games such as Naxat's excellent port of 1943 Kai. The compositions are all really good in Coryoon, though they aren't as strong or as catchy as Airzonk would end up being. Still, the template very clearly started here, and a great many sound effects found in Coryoon would also make a one-to-one jump to Airzonk as well. Coryoon's interface is round and bubbly, with a simple title menu that can be scrolled through by pressing up or down to display one choice at a time. Every option features unique, detailed, unreasonably cute pixel art for each, giving every menu selection almost too much personality for just one small part of a greater menu. It's awesome. As an aside, there are also a few neat secrets to be discovered by way of the sound test here as well, but we won't get into those here. Those can be looked up easily enough online. There's a lot to like about Coryoon, and while it isn't without fault, it'll still make many who play it swoon. But how does it stack up? Let's take a look. Sporting competent control and an easy-to-follow scheme, Coryoon works well with any PC Engine controller the player may be using. Just make sure to boost up Coryoon's movement speed. Coryoon liberally distributes extends like once every minute. That's not an exaggeration either. Maintaining 9 lives is so easy to do, and a 1cc is almost a certainty on normal difficulty. Ratchet this one up to hard. With 8 long stages, Coryoon's playtime is longer than one might expect. It also sports 2 and 5-minute time attack modes, adding some replay to the mix. Score chasing could also extend the time players spend with Coryoon, and its backup memory feature is great for saving scores and progress. Never mind that Coryoon's design is so sugary that it could give someone type 2 diabetes. The great use of parallax and the general design of most of the enemies and bosses here are great. However, hidden sprites when things get too crowded and an error with the code that results in an odd static hamper the overall quality. The exact same engine that would be used in Airzonk more or less began here, and while the BGM isn't as good as Airzonk would be, it's still a cut above. Many sound effects would also migrate to Airzonk as well. The systems at play in Coryoon are admittedly very simple, but they work for the kind of audience that this game seems to be designed for. It's also great for super green shooting game novices. You all saw the screenshots earlier this episode. If you want this game, get ready to either win the lottery or get real irresponsible with your money. Its value just can't possibly match its going rates. It may be baby's first shmup, and it may have its issues, and it may be expensive beyond its worth, but damn if I don't enjoy playing Coryoon. Airzonk will always be better on a technical level, in its general presentation, and because nostalgia's a powerful friggin' force with me, but Coryoon is still a charming-ass game. Day will never agree, but I'm calling the shots here, and Coryoon gets a 4.25 out of 5.
Wait, what?
You can get a copy of Coryoon at auction for completely unreasonable amounts of cash, or other means if you're so inclined. So what's next? How will we proceed? Well, I think it's time to hunker down and get through one of my personal white whales. A Blaster Master Clear on NES has been elusive to me in my formative years, but I think I may have the skill to resolve and put that to rest. And it's coming up in episode 301 of Bullet Heaven. There's still yet more to come, so stick around and we'll see you all in the next episode.